Most people have no idea, none, how much money they're going to need in retirement. If you're 50 years old and you make $40,000 a year, you will need
Yo, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to Black Excellence Daily. I'm your host, Sean Croxton. Thank you for tuning in. We've got Mellody Hobson back on the show today. She's going to talk about the taboo around money, how it's something that we really don't talk about, how a child can essentially go their entire childhood and adolescence without ever having a conversation about money at home and without learning anything about money at school. Which to me is like that's very problematic because we're becoming adults who don't have any sense of direction when it comes to our finances, which makes this whole thing very overwhelming because we had no early childhood experience with it. She's also going to talk about your number. This is something that everybody needs to know. You have to know what your number is. I know it can feel overwhelming, but you have to know how much money you're going to need to retire. If you're trying to avoid it, you're putting yourself and your family in a very bad place because, as she says, I think it's the number 2 fear is running out of money. If you run out of money, you're probably going to have to start borrowing from your kids, and that's going to hurt not just your kids, but also your grandkids. And so you have to know these numbers. You got to work toward these numbers and understand that you're not trying to save your way to your retirement number. You just can't put your money into a Bank of America account and expect to be able to save enough money. You have to be willing to invest that money and let compound interest take care of it. And that's why I'm always encouraging you to learn about investing in the stock market. If you need any book recommendations, just let me know. Hit me up on Instagram at Sean Croxton. Mellody Hobson is coming up.
maybe the emotion that I also want to mention is hopelessness. One of the places where people get really hopeless really quickly is when I talk to them about how much money they'll need when they retire. The comedian Jackie Mason said, "I have money to last me my entire life as long as I don't buy anything." And that's, I think, how a lot of people feel. Most people have no idea, none, how much money they're going to need in retirement. If you're 50 years old and you make $40,000 a year, you will need just over $430,000 in your retirement account when you retire in order to maintain your lifestyle. And that's if you retire at the age of 65. The biggest fear that people have, which is justified, is outliving their money. This is real. If you retire at the age of 65 and you live to 100, you need 35 years of money. That is really hard to wrap your brain around. Not to mention, some of you may have young children. I have a 4-year-old. A baby born today is definitely expected to live past 100. There was a Time magazine cover very recently that said the baby born today will live to 150. And so when you think about that in terms of how much money they need, that is a staggering sum. And it requires us to think very differently, even from today, than what we've done in the past. People who look at the charts and see what they need for retirement, they literally give up. They get this hopelessness. They get this discouragement which says, why bother? They say, I'm too old. I can't catch up. I'll never be able to save this much. I can't do it. And my point is, in telling these stories, because of all these emotions wrapped around money, people find it a very, very, very hard subject to talk about to their spouses or their children or even to themselves. I know people who will talk to their children about sex, but not about money. There was actually a survey, and the survey asked parents, what are you more likely to talk about? They said sex and drugs over money any day because money is so uncomfortable for them. So they will talk about a condom, but not a credit card, which makes no sense to me. In other families, for example, I know people who choose not to tell their kids they've been laid off when that has happened, which is the worst thing you can do. Kids know that something's up. I remember meeting a woman during the financial crisis, and her husband had been laid off, and she told me, we're not going to tell the kids. In fact, we're still going to take our vacation. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, maybe you should worry and maybe you should tell the kids, because pretending that this didn't happen is not a healthy way for them to live, and they are going to feel it and suspect it. Money habits are one of our most learned behaviors. Whatever issues you have about money, if you have children now or one day, I promise you, you will inadvertently pass those behaviors on to your children. So you should To the extent that you think that that is a possibility for you, or it currently is one, take a hold of what those emotions are. And if they're uncomfortable and difficult for you, try to wrestle them to the ground now before it extends to another generation. Even though my own insecurities are irrational, I am very, very deliberate about the knowledge around money and the conversation about money that I'm having with my daughter, who's 4 years old. And I don't want it to be that the things that shape me that I pass on to her, where she feels that same insecurity and that financial burden when she will have a very different outlook in her life than I will. But I do talk to her about responsibility already at age 4, and the fact that because of the circumstances in which she's been born, she's won the birth lottery. And that birth lottery comes with a lot of expectations in terms of the future. To children, this is why this conversation is so important. Money is very mysterious. It's mysterious because of how we manage money today. Children do not understand money coming out of machines. And that's how they see most of their parents get it. It is hard to explain that it has a finite nature to it when you just go to a machine and take it out. They also don't understand it. It's very hard to understand when you're dealing with credit cards. I've had a lot of parents tell me that when they tell their children they can't afford something, the children will say, just put it on a credit card, because that's the way a lot of parents live. They actually do that. They do buy things that they can't afford that way. Then, of course, we know parents hand off credit cards to 18-year-olds who go to college. And oftentimes they've done it with no training. I call credit cards a weapon of mass destruction. And it's a weapon of mass destruction because you're giving your credit card to a young person. They've never been trained on how to use it. They're never going to call. And you're at the least likely position to be able to influence anything that they do. And today, because of the Card Act back in 2009, your credit history and credit future is tied to what decisions that they make. So I always tell people, think about someone giving a teenager a credit card when they're 15, not 18 and walking out the door, and you have no time to really equip them for what they need to know. And this is super important because in American schools today, you don't learn about money. This amazes me. That in high school in America today, you can take woodshop or auto, but not a class on investing. Mostly because most teachers don't have that knowledge and information to be able to pass on. So it always leads me to wonder, who whittles? Who cleans their own carburetor, right? No one. And yet the money class is life-changing, not only for you, but for generations of people behind you. And yet we don't do that. Now, I had a friend who told me a story that I thought was so interesting. The wife of a friend grew up in Hungary before the Iron Curtain came down. And interestingly, she said, under communism, the kids there learned about saving. They would buy stamps in minimal amounts for a stamp book. They'd put it away in these passport-sized books. And at the end of the year, you would take your book and get it exchanged for money that would come back. That was under communism. And we don't even do that well in the king of the capitalist society in terms of America. So here's the problem. We don't know about saving money in this country very well. And this is particularly problematic at a time when most people don't have corporate pensions that they can lean on anymore. You know, you don't work for a company anymore for 30 years and retire with a secure pension and a gold watch. Those days are just over. And interestingly, when 401k plans, which many of you know about, were started, they were supposed to just be supplemental income in retirement. They were never supposed to be the whole retirement solution, but that's what they've become. And when I say that we don't save enough, right now, the average American is putting away just over $5,000 a year in a 401k plan. And the average account size is very, very low. A quarter of people say that they have less than 25% saved, $25,000 saved for retirement. A quarter of working Americans today. Now, remember that number I told you about how much you would need if you were 50 years old and made $40,000 a year? And so because of that, this is why I'm so passionate about this issue. I'm like an evangelist. We have to change our thinking in this country. The Chinese save over 50% of their income. They do it because they have to. They have no social programs. They have no Social Security. They have no Medicare, no Medicaid. They don't have any of those things. They understand that when they're old, they are all that they've got or their families. And so as a result of that, they have a much more deliberate and thoughtful culture around saving and investing that we just don't have here. And I have to tell you, I knew early on, I told you, I had this burning desire to understand money. And I knew early on that I had no one to depend on but myself. I didn't come from a family of any money, as you have already gleaned. And you may say that that's a harsh view of the world. It isn't. When I was in my early 20s, I've often made this statement in many, many speeches I've given. I read this quote from this folk singer named Judy Collins, that I was not a Judy Collins fan or anything like that. But I read this quote, and she said, as women, we are raised to have rescue fantasies. And I'm here to tell you, no one is coming. I read that quote and I was like, oh my goodness. Now I'm going to call myself a girl, that was not how the story went. Rapunzel got rescued, Snow White got rescued, Sleeping Beauty got rescued. I chaired the board of DreamWorks. Shrek rescued Fiona. Every story I was told was about being rescued. And so when I read this quote, I said, no one is coming. And then I started to think, no one came from my mom. No one is coming. How would you live your life? How would you take responsibility for yourself financially? How would you take responsibility for your children and family if you knew no one was coming? Now, I heard myself saying, that is my plan now. I will shift. How will I make sure that I'm not at the whims of some kind of safety net that will save me, but that I fully owned this future? And I felt so good about the fact that I had that message sink in when I was in my early 20s. I was about 22 years old when I read that quote. And I say that because I want to make sure we don't believe in financial fairy tales. I think a lot of people do. We have to start taking responsibility for ourselves in this country when it comes to this issue of money. Because the government, with our government having almost $19 trillion in debt and growing, no one is coming. I mean, if you are even a person under the age of 40 years old right now, under age of 50, Social Security is looking dicey. And as we all know, it's not a fund, it's pay as you go. And we're running out of people. We have more people who are going to be retired than people who are working. And so we will not have enough money. Not to mention the fact that when you look at the typical Social Security check, it's very low. The average Social Security check in this country right now is about $1,200 a month. My mother's check was $400 before she died. She died when she was 85 years old, about 4 or 5 years ago. It was $400 because women step out of the workforce to raise our children. They call it the mommy tax. And so when we step out of the workforce, we are not accruing those Social Security contributions. And so women definitely have lower retirement accounts than our male counterparts. I love this new quote. Bono has this effort that's going at the One campaign where he's calling poverty a sexist. And in many ways, that's absolutely true. The likelihood of being old and poor is much higher for a woman than it is for a man because of some of the reasons I've already talked about. So the goal for me was freedom. Financial security gives you choice and freedom. And that, I thought, was the most amazing feeling. And that is something that I know is possible for everyone. And I say everyone because everyone thinks I'm telling a story about wealth creation from people who have a lot of money. But some of my favorite stories I've ever heard about investing were people who made very, very little. There was a washwoman. It was a very famous story in the South who had never made more than $15,000 a year. And when she died, she gave one of the historical Black colleges $150,000. She'd never made more than $15,000 a year. In her lifetime, she did that with nickels and dimes. So it's not about how much money you are making. It's about your intent when it comes to saving.
That was Mellody Hobson. Her website is arialinvestments.com. You can watch today's talk on YouTube. It's called Mellody Hobson. Ariel Investments discusses the need for financial literacy. All right, John Hope Bryant is on tomorrow. Stay tuned. I'll see you then. Peace.